I learned a lot from successes, but I think I learned more from failures. And the two most powerful and in some ways painful lessons I learned both had a common issue to them. They were, let me give you the two circumstances. In one circumstance, when I was chair of the AT&T Foundation, this is way back in the early 80s, I chaired it for over a decade. We were the largest contributor at that time to Planned Parenthood, and for a variety of reasons having to do with barriers between the way funds were allocated, which Planned Parenthood at that time didn't have, and we were funding educational programs. We ended up having to withdraw funds because they were going for lobbying purposes for abortion. Let me give you the bottom line and then I'll come back. The bottom line was it was one of the great public relations catastrophes of the decade. Planned Parenthood ended up turning on us. We were their very largest supporter for 16 years. They took out ads all over America. They urged people to boycott us. We had shareholder resolutions on this subject for 12 years. The second situation, I'll tell you what I learned in a moment. The second situation was not that dissimilar, and also making it extremely painful was in my organization. And that was when a magazine, the company magazine that we had, Focus, commissioned some artwork that was roughly maybe 2-3 inches square, never even went through the normal process because it was so small. It was a map of the world on each of the continents. This freelance artist had put little representations, you know, in Europe might be a little girl with a Dutch hat, and in Africa put a monkey. And it blew up into a major racial incident involving AT&T. Just to give you an idea of how horrible it can get, this little tiny cartoon ended up being blown up many, many times its size and ended up on page 1 of the Washington Post and was distributed to hotel rooms all over Washington on the day that the Democratic Black Caucus opened their convention in Washington, and it turned into a major national incident. As bad as the external implications were, the internal were even more terrible, as our own employees of color rose up, and years and years and years of work that we had done and had a fabulous reputation at the time for diversity just went out the window. The two things I learned from both of those incidents were, first of all, when you get into really deep trouble, it's terribly important to get outside counsel, because the strategies we ended up following in both of those incidents were, in my view, ultimately too slow and too apologetic. We bent over backwards in both of them. Ultimately too far backwards to the point where it seemed somewhat less credible because we felt so guilty. If I had called in outside counsel, which we did not because we had a huge staff, I suspect I would have gotten the kind of counsel I would have given another company in that circumstance. It would have been more objective, it would have been tougher, and it would have been faster. Second thing I learned is one of the most important lessons anybody in public relations can ever learn at any level. Once an incident involves values, never, never underestimate the impact of that issue. When you are engaged in issues that are high-profile values, or even if you don't look often for the personal values issues underneath what seem like more commonplace problems, you will die on the battlefield of conflicting values. And in those circumstances, you are really in deep trouble, and you need to know that before you get there. And if you stumble into that kind of battlefield, you need to really understand you're immediately in a very tragic kind of crisis.